All right, so the question is base clear or single stage urethane? What's better? What lasts longer? In the old days, if it was metallic finish versus a solid color, metallics, I'd always use base clear. Solid colors, I would use single stage. Now, I've heard conversations on both sides of this. Guys will say, well, the old school paint jobs lasted a lot longer than these new ones do. And they say that, oh, look at this is a 30-year-old paint job, 40-year-old paint job. I know people with base clear that are 30 and 40 years old too. It just depends on how you take care of it. Each one will last. There's problems with both. Let's talk about those things. Now, when you're talking about single stage urethane, one of the problems with single stage urethane is it starts to do something called oxidize over time. And you see that it kind of turns white, like you just have to polish it all the time. You're constantly out there having to put not a wax, but you buff off all the stuff. They used to have a product called TR3 that was real common, and they used to have another product called Parco Blue, which was basically TR3 on steroids, which they no longer make because most people are using base coat, clear coat. And maybe your question is why did they do that versus those old paint jobs? Those old single stage urethane paint jobs required maintenance. You had to go out, buff it, put TR3 on it, or we used to use the Parco Blue, which was 1,000 times better. If you look it up on the internet, you'll find like something, there's like a picture of Parco Blue. I tried to buy some because it's really good for restoring old paint, which is even better than TR3. It's just like super amazing. But again, they don't make it. They stopped making it because people weren't using it, because the base clear is basically almost a maintenance-free type of system. Now, then you can get into the stuff where they got these ceramic coatings and all that stuff. You can put on those things and they'll even last longer. The clear coats will just last just really nice and be almost no maintenance to touch or even do anything with. So in that respect, they're better that way. But I've heard people say, hey, I want to get the old single stage because it lasts longer. The actual truth to that is it doesn't last longer. The new clear coats, if you take care of the car, if it's out in the sun all the time and you do the maintenance to the old coating, it might not do what the clear coats do, which is leaving them out in the sun all the time. If you leave them out in the sun for 10 years, they're going to delaminate eventually. And that's what people see, is they see that delaminated clear and they say, oh, well, that doesn't last as long as the old stuff. But I can tell you that if you don't maintain that old paint, that old single stage urethane, it's going to start to look bad. So it's up to you as far as whether you want to do all that work. For me, I'd rather use base coat, clear coat most of the time because I don't want to have to go out and polish and buff. And like I said, a lot of the products that do that are gone. They brought back the TR3. It was gone, and I don't know what happened. I think they brought it back somehow. There wasn't any available for a while, and that stuff just removes oxidation very easily. So if you have an old car and you're trying to restore the paint, find that product TR3. It's kind of a bluish color when you put it on. So I said they used to have a product called Parco Blue, and I tell you right now, you could talk to 100 old painters and none of them would even know what that is. Parco Blue. Look it up, you'll find a little thing on it. But Parco was a company that made this stuff, and they had Parco Blue, and it was basically a super TR3. It just went on faster, wiped off easier, basically the same thing. Well, because they have a lack of those products now, I'd prefer just using the clear. And then, most of the time, it is more work to put on clear because you got to put on base coat and you got to put on clear coat. Now, another thing that I think about is the old term color sanding. And where that came from is the old lacquer paints were solid colors, and it was done the same way. You put it on, you had to polish old lacquer. It wouldn't look shiny at all. You put it on, it'd be the dullest stuff ever. And then you go out there with your, back then I think we used about 600 grit. You didn't need to use 1500 grit and all that other stuff, because that stuff would just cut and polish really nice, and you'd cut and buff all your work was done after you painted it. With the old lacquer, you put it on and you do everything was all about cut and buff. And so that term color sanding came from when they had a single stage paint where you were sanding the color, and you'd have a bunch of color all over the place. Now, one of the other things I don't like, and like I said, I'll still use single stage sometimes. There's times when I want to do it. I just don't want to go through the hassle of, again, getting clear out after I've already done a base. It is more work when you're doing the painting part. The price of color is much more than the price of clear, and that's what's changed since the old days a lot. Used to be you could buy your acrylic enamel or something like that, and it was okay. Now the paints are a lot better. If you're going to use like an acrylic enamel versus using a base coat, clear coat, the acrylic enamel is not going to last nearly as long as a base coat, clear coat, just so you know. I would suggest going to single stage urethane, which is a little better and has a little less maintenance. It doesn't fade as much, or it's not really fading, oxidizing. When you get that little bit of a white on the surface and you have to kind of buff it off, it doesn't oxidize as quickly as the acrylic enamels do. So if somebody says, hey, the clear tends to peel off sooner, it's probably because they did one of two things. They used a very inexpensive, cheap clear coat, or they thinned down the clear. This is a big mistake people make all the time. They paint with the clear and they want it to come out smoother, so they add reducer to it. I've had guys even say, hey, I'll put another coat on. It doesn't matter. When you add that reducer, when you add too much reducer, some of them require some reducer, but you add too much reducer to that, it atomizes something out of the clear that makes it last. I've seen it hundreds of times over the years. I used to go to the shop and I would go, hey man, this clear didn't last. And he goes, well, did you reduce it? Yeah. Oh, well, that was the problem. And then I stopped reducing it and started dealing with more orange peel and just color sanding it out, and the clear started lasting a lot longer. This was a long time ago when they first started doing base coat, clear coat, when I figured all that stuff out. So one of the do nots, if you're using clear, is reduce it. I'm going to tell you, over reduce it. Let me just put it that way. If it says on the can you can reduce it 10%, I don't even go that far. I might only go 5, because I do not want to have that clear breakdown when I'm spraying it and atomize out some of the stuff that it needs to make it last. So if you're using good clear and you've got it over a base, it shouldn't delaminate. You shouldn't have those problems that people say that you have if you do it right. And it should last probably longer and have a lot less maintenance to do than if you do the single stage. Another thing is, people tell you the water base doesn't last as long as solvent. About 20 years ago I would tell you, hell yeah, you're right, because they didn't have that stuff figured out. They were having adhesion problems with the base coat over stuff, and now they've kind of got that stuff worked out pretty well, and a lot of that stuff's on prep. I'm not the guy to ask because I won't use it normally, because it's got, for your restoration at home or something like that, it's really hard to do. For doing panel match in a body shop and doing stuff like that, it's probably a whole lot easier because you're dealing with a newer car, newer finishes. You're not having to try and restore the surface, and when you're not having to do that, then basically it's a lot easier. You don't have to do all that surfacing. When you have to do all that surfacing to an old car, it's a lot harder, I think, to use water-based than solvent. But, you know, some guys will argue that, and I'm not going to argue with them. If that's what they like to use, then they can use it. Is it going to last a long time? Sure. You know, if any product is used right, it's going to last. And it's not, you know, people, water-based is no good. It's not true. This stuff, it just depends on how it's prepped. It has to have, you can't put it over any bare metal. You can't have anything like that. Like, you could get away with it a little bit if you had a couple nibs showing on a solvent base. It probably wouldn't be a problem, but on a water base, it will be. It's an issue, and everything will show up with that stuff. So anyway, the whole thing about the water-based thing, it's really not true either. You know, that it's a better product if I'm going to go get the, you know, whatever. Now, the difference is some states have the higher VOC limits, and some of those states, because they have the higher VOC limits, will have higher solids clears, which are better than lower solids clears. Like California, I think their highest solids is like 46%. I don't know. I was talking to the paint store on formulation, and they said it was like 46%. And you'll see stuff in the 48 states or whatever it is that is 59% solid. So you can get a better clear in some of the states. Now that would be something that would be different than, you know, the other stuff. But as far as single stage lasting longer than base coat, clear coat, I think it's really a farce. It's not really true, you know, and it just depends on how you take care of it. If you put your car in a garage at night and whatever, or all the time, you keep it out of the sun, it could last 20, 25 years or more if you take care of it. So either way, so it really doesn't make that much difference. It's, you know, it's not as big a difference as people say. The biggest difference is the amount of work that you're going to have to do to maintain the finish to look good. Is you're going to have to, on the single stage, you're going to have to get out there and polish it, get all that oxidation off of it. The clears just don't do that. They don't do that at all. And the other thing you're going to have to do is you're going to have to buy more product. This one I was going to bring up earlier, but I forgot. You're going to have to buy a lot more color, which color is a lot more expensive than clear when you paint the car, because you're going to paint it, color sand and buff it, right? So you're going to sand off color, which is a lot more expensive to sand off than clear. So that's why, another reason why I like to use base clear versus the other, because I'm going to sand off all that color, and that costs, every time I see that color falling off of there, I see money. It's just falling off, and it's really no reason for it. So anyway, I'll talk to you next video. Please like, share, and subscribe.